A boy sits on a living room floor and watches a funeral fill the screen. Soldiers carry a coffin through a heaving crowd. A widow steps to the microphone and her voice breaks. That country was South Africa. The man in the coffin, its most famous prisoner. The boy will carry that grief for 40 years. But the man in that coffin was still alive and would walk out to lead that country for 5 more years. So whose funeral did the boy watch? And if thousands of strangers watched the same one, whose memory is broken? The boy's or the crowd's? From that broadcast, we walk to the evidence and find something stranger. Follow the empty case to David. Call him David. He stands for millions who remember it. 52 now, alone tonight in a broadcast archive, hunting the proof he has carried since childhood. He finds the case with the right date printed on its spine, the reel that should hold the footage he watched with his family. He lifts it down. He opens it. It is empty. The reel is gone. David tells himself the reel was misfiled, borrowed, lost. That happens. But then he reads the catalog card clipped to the shelf. The card lists the broadcast plainly, a transmission that by every official trace never went out on air. The record insists on a thing the record cannot support. He is not the only one who lost it, and he was not the first to feel that floor tilt. Years later, someone would go looking and be startled by how many other people had lost the very same evening. The same coffin, the same crowd, the same speech. They grieved a funeral that never aired. Strangers who never met, describing the same lost evening in the same detail. That is the crack we are following. So the myth begins where the boy began. Turn back to a Johannesburg living room in the 1980s, to a family gathered around a television. So which one is lying, the boy's memory or the archive that swears it was never there? Let the memory speak at full strength, the way believers tell it. On a gray afternoon in the 1980s, a nation's cameras gathered outside a prison. The news carried the funeral of a man who had died behind those walls. Children watched it from living room floors. Grown men remember the black armbands, the slow procession, the hush in the announcer's voice. And they remember the widow standing at a microphone, her voice breaking as she thanked a country for its grief. One survey later put it near half of those asked. Millions recall it in near-perfect sync. The date, the weather, the way the broadcast cut to a wide shot of the crowd. But the man they mourned was still alive. He would walk free and govern the country for 5 more years. The funeral they watched had never once aired. This is where the story finally got a name. The name came in 2009 from Fiona Broom, a paranormal researcher and blogger, not a memory scientist. She found thousands of people online sharing the exact same false memory. She had expected to be alone with hers. Instead, she found a crowd. Strangers who had never met described the identical broadcast. They corrected each other's small details, as if comparing notes on a real event. Why did it feel so believable? Because the era supplied the props. Those were years of grainy transmissions, somber anchors reading tragedy from paper, prison news that arrived with no picture to check it against. Memory filled the gaps the way memory always does, with the most fitting scene it could build. So a real grief found a false stage, and the stage held. But Broom's thread did something stranger. Beside the funeral, it listed dozens of unrelated memories that were also, apparently, wrong. A children's book spelled a way it had never been printed. A board game's mascot wore something he had never worn. None of it connected to a president, or a prison, or a widow's speech. And yet the shape of the error was the same every time. So the question stops being about one man. Whose memory exactly is this? David went back to the archive, but this time he did not look for the film. He looked for the paper around it. A broadcast that airs leaves a wake behind itself. An engineer's log, a press clipping, a schedule stamped with a date and a time. He pulled the folder for the day believers cite, the day the funeral was supposed to fill the screen. The folder held nothing about it. No reel, no log, no clipping. The absence sat there, calm and complete, and that absence became his first real clue. A funeral, watched by thousands, should have scarred the paper trail somewhere. This one had not. And a memory that leaves no trace behind it starts to look less like history and more like something the mind built on its own. So David did what any honest investigator does. He looked for the same shape elsewhere, in places that had nothing to do with a president or a country. He found it first in a children's book. Millions of grown readers swear the beloved Bear family everyone read as kids was spelled with an E-I-N. Each printed copy tells another story. The archives, the trademark filings, the faded covers across decades of print all agree on E-A-I-N. The book was right the whole time. The memory was the thing that moved. Then a board game gave him the third crack. The old top-hatted mascot of the world's best-known board game is remembered wearing a monocle by roughly 1 in 4 asked online. That is, one stranger in every 4 insisting on a small circle of glass. No edition in over 90 years of printing ever drew him one. Here is what unsettled David most. These 3 memories share nothing. A funeral, a bear, a cartoon millionaire. Different decades, but they break in exactly the same way. That is a pattern. Every printed trace agrees with itself and disagrees with the memory. So what, exactly, is memory quietly doing to all of them? David turned to the science, and to a cognitive scientist named Elizabeth Loftus, who spent 2 decades doing something that sounds impossible. She sat ordinary people down and, using nothing but careful questions, planted an entire childhood event that had never happened. A time they were lost in a shopping mall, a stranger who led them to safety. Weeks later, the subjects described that day in warm, specific detail. The panic, the crowd, the kind face. None of it was real. She had built a memory the way you build a stage set, and the mind moved in and made itself at home. But the method matters more than the trick. Loftus did not argue that people lie. She showed that recall is not playback at all. Neuroscientists describe remembering not as opening a sealed file, but as rebuilding a scene from scattered fragments, fresh, every single time. It is closer to reassembling a shattered vase than replaying a tape. And each time you rebuild, you can slip a new shard in among the old ones. A suggestion, a leading word, another person's certainty. The seam will not show. That has stakes far outside the laboratory. Step into a courtroom where a memory becomes a verdict. Researchers studying eyewitnesses found most overturned convictions rested on a witness entirely sincere, entirely wrong. The witness felt no doubt. The face on the stand was simply the wrong face, rebuilt. Now take a smaller case, one you can test on yourself tonight. Take the famous line everyone quotes from a 1980 film. 2 in 3 name a father who is never named on screen. The real line omits the name. You can play the scene and hear the gap where your memory inserted it. So the machinery is not in doubt. A mind can be talked, gently, into a memory that never occurred. But if that is true of a mall, a courtroom, a movie line, then the same method now has to be turned on one last thing. So turn that same method on David's funeral broadcast. Lay the pieces of David's memory on the desk, one by one, and the whole thing quietly falls apart. Start with the funeral he watched as a boy. The trouble is not the reel that never turned up in the archive. The trouble is the man lying in that coffin. Because on the day David remembers weeping strangers and a nation in black, that man was very much alive, sitting in a cell. He would walk out to govern a country for 5 more years. You cannot broadcast the funeral of someone who has not died yet. The widow's mourning speech David recalls is real. Every word of it happened, but it was delivered many years later at a memorial for her late husband, an occasion with no coffin, no burial, no crowd in black. A woman spoke of loss and endurance, and cameras rolled. Years afterward, a boy's memory reached back, took that speech, and slid it into a grave that was never dug. 2 true things fused into one false one. That is not a lie. That is memory doing its quiet, ordinary repair. The same repair explains 2 smaller cracks sitting right beside it. The children's book spelled one way in every printed copy, in every trademark filing, remembered another way by millions. The board game mascot who never once wore a monocle, seen with one by roughly 1 in 4 people asked. Neither is rewritten. Both are the mind rebuilding a scene from fragments, filling the gap with the shape that fits best. Then it hands the whole thing back as certainty. Set the file down now. On the facts alone, nothing more needs proving. The president lived, the speech was later, the shelf was always empty, and every crack has a name in a psychology textbook. It explains what happened. It does not explain why the truth still feels like the forgery. So why does it? The facts line up, and still David cannot shake it. Shown the archive, shown the empty shelf, shown the man who lived on for years, he only nods. Then he quietly admits the wrong version feels more real than the true one. He is not lying or foolish. His brain did something ordinary and strange at once. It kept the memory perfectly and simply lost the receipt. Psychologists call it a source monitoring error. The mind keeps the fact and forgets where the fact came from. It might be a real event, a dream, a parody, or a friend's careless retelling. David's funeral is real to him, only its origin has gone missing. He remembers the grief, the black and white screen, the widow's voice, every fragment intact, vivid, dated. What he no longer remembers is that he assembled them himself. One mind alone cannot build a myth this large. It needed a room full of strangers. It found one in 2009, in the same thread Fiona Broome had started, where the funeral crowd first gathered to compare memories that never matched the record. One person's doubt met another's certainty, and certainty won. Belief confirmed belief. What began as a quiet private crack became a shared foundation. A stranger agreeing feels like proof, and 1,000 strangers agreeing feels like history. That machine from the forum thread never switched off. It only got faster and louder. Every shared feed today runs the same loop David's brain ran, live, on millions at once. The plain answer rarely satisfies, so the film that follows chooses it anyway. Over a grander one some reach for instead. They borrow from real physics. A 50s idea says every outcome spawns a new universe. Then they point at a Swiss particle accelerator, claiming it tore a hole between timelines. No physicist there has ever supported that claim, and the grand theory dies in a single sentence, which is exactly why it will not stay dead. But a memory error is a small, tired story, and a torn universe is a magnificent one. David knows all of this now. He can recite the mechanism back to you. So why, tonight, does the empty shelf still feel like the thing that lied? David comes back to the same shelf, the one from the first night, and this time he does not flinch when the case comes up empty. Now, finally, he understands. The shelf was never robbed. Nothing was taken from it because nothing was ever placed there. The funeral he watched as a boy did not vanish from the archive. It simply never arrived, on any reel, in any log, in any engineer's note. And that is the stranger story. A theft would mean there was once a truth to steal. What actually happened is harder to hold. A whole grief, complete with a widow's voice, assembled itself inside millions of heads out of borrowed pieces of real footage that were never once broadcast together. Look again at the old television, still glowing there in the dark room. The boy believed the screen was recording the world for him, sealing each broadcast into memory like film into a can. But memory does not seal. It rebuilds a scene from fragments, every time. Not a locked file breaking open, a vase you are still gluing back together. So the screen and the vase are the same object here. Each remembered funeral was rebuilt from scratch, that morning, out of the pieces lying nearest to hand. We can explain how one mind confabulates. Why strangers rebuild the identical wrong detail, we can only guess at. The same story, passed hand to hand until it hardens. The same missing monocle, the same false spelling, the same funeral. Science has mapped the mechanism inside one skull. It has not mapped the convergence across millions. So sit with this. What memory do you still believe, even after someone showed you the proof? The empty shelf was never a wound. It was always a mirror. The boy's memory was the thing that broke, not the world it swore it had seen. So look one more time and ask what else it is quietly still showing you.